Episode 60. Hello, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff, and I'll be your host as we listen to eyewitness encounters involving one of the most terrifying cryptids, Dogmen. Tonight's the 60th episode of the show, and I wanted to break tradition. Instead of bringing on another eyewitness to talk about their encounter, I wanted to replay some of the most popular encounters that have aired on the show. If you're an eyewitness who has been on the show and your encounter isn't played on this show tonight, please don't take that as a slight. I still appreciate you coming on the show and being willing to share your encounter. All of the encounters that have been on the show have been good ones. It just so happens that these encounters that I'm going to play tonight are among the most popular ones that have aired. The first encounter we're going to start off with is episode 21, Larry Parker.
Dave and I were bow hunting in October, and we decided that rifle season was about a month away, and we wanted to go in deep enough to where we could actually get a sizable game that not too many people would have the nerve to trek back into, because most hunters only hunt within a half mile from their vehicle. Here in northern Michigan, opening day of rifle season, the Orange Army is just unreal. So we went and we scouted. We actually took horses and went in on horseback initially. And we found the area that we wanted to hunt. It was mixed woods and good game trail, like I said earlier. So we figured we'd need to find a two-track to come back into. And a two-track is like a little vehicle path that goes through the woods up here. We found a two-track and rode it out, and then rode back up the main highway back to his property. And at the time, I had a little 89 Toyota 4x4, and we put bags of apples and buckets of carrots in it, and we went back there and we scattered it in the area. We don't put a pile out there. We scatter the bait. As a hunter, I feel hunting off a pile is relatively unethical. And so I went back there and I maintained the area and kept bait in the area for them. And every time I went back in there, it was like I felt like I was being watched, like something was there. And I'd taken binoculars with me, and I'd look through my binoculars and try and see what's going on. And I'd get up in the bed of my pickup and look. There's nothing I could see. There were times where I thought I saw something move, but then I didn't see anything. And so that's how we got into that area. Something had been eating the bait, and I figured it was deer, or maybe even being on a swamp, possibly a bear coming in. That kind of a thing, I thought. And so opening day of rifle season, we went back in there and hunted in the morning. And there wasn't much going on in the morning. I mean, not a blue jay, not a squirrel, not a crow, not a raven, nothing. And we went in the house and had our lunch, and we sat there and we discussed the area for a little bit. So that afternoon we went back out there into the new area. And Dave asked me prior to going back out there and prior to the morning hunt for me to bring a different kind of round with me, and it was a ballistic tip round. And I had backup clips for my 30-06. It was semi-automatic, 3x9 by 40 millimeter scope on it. Really nice gun. And, I'm thinking, well, sure, I'll bring it. I've hunted deer with these rounds. They're great. That afternoon, we went back out there, and it was about 4:30 in the evening. We got out there about 2, and I hadn't seen a thing. But I kept getting the feeling of being watched. I kept feeling a presence. And there were times where I thought I noticed movement in the area around me, and I looked where I thought I saw the movement, and was nothing there. Well, I brought a binocular with me, like a small telescope with a filter on the thing, and I used that to pick up deer and everything because of how well camouflaged the deer are. And I still saw nothing. So I'm sitting there, and Dave comes over the headset, and he's, Larry, we got to go. We got to get out of here. We got to go now. And I'm like, okay, what's going on? And he says, I want you to put those other rounds in. And I says, okay. And he says, I'm coming to your blind. So I stepped down a little bit. I put on the hunter orange vest for walking through the woods and everything. And I myself, I wear woodland camo when I hunt. That's my preference of hunting camouflage. Dave come up to the blind, and he says, are you ready to go? I says, not really. Why? He says, we got to get out of here now. So we started hoofing it, and we went a little ways. He says, did you put those rounds in? I said, no, not yet. We stopped, and I changed rounds. I ejected the current round out of the chamber, and I changed magazines and put one of the ballistic tip rounds in the chamber. And so Dave and I are getting ready to move, and I noticed Dave was staring, and I brought my 30-06 up. I'm looking through the scope, and this creature stepped out from behind a maple tree. And I'm like, what in the hell is this? And I'm kind of looking at it, and instinct went to draw down on its chest. And I started getting this feeling like I was being threatened. So I pulled the trigger, and I brought the rifle down, and the creature was still standing there. I know I hit the creature. I turn, Dave's gone. I bring the rifle back up, look through the scope again, and this thing was definitely in a threatenative posture. It made itself look like it was, it was huge. I would say height-wise, it was probably 7, maybe 7.5 feet in height. And I just instinctively pulled the trigger a second time. Only this time, I watched. I watched the bullet actually hit it in the chest. I saw a blood spray. Then I brought the rifle down, and I looked, and the creature was still standing there. Now, this creature was probably 200 yards away from me at this point, if not maybe a little further. And that's when I decided to hightail it, and it let out this freakish growl. Okay? And I made it back to Dave's house. It was dark when I got back there. Dave was in the house. He had the doors barricaded. He had stuff over the windows. And he had all of his weapons out. And it took me about 5 minutes to get Dave to let me in. At that point, I said, Dave, I says, what in God's name is going on? And Dave leveled with me. He said, this thing has been coming around the house for a couple weeks. He says, Larry, I set you up. He says, I know you shoot it. He says, I didn't have the gunpowder you got. And he said, what do you think it is? I said, I can tell you what it's not. I said, it's not a bear. I said, I don't know what it is. So we talked for a little bit, and I went out to my truck, and I left. About 2 in the morning, I get a phone call from Dave. He says, you got to come over here. He says, you're not going to believe what's happened. I said, oh, come on, man. It's 2 in the morning, Dave. He says, Larry, he says, I'm not pulling your leg or anything. He says, you got to get over here. He says, this thing came up. He says, and the horses they got attacked. He says, the lean-to was tore up. And he says, you've sewn up the horses before. He says, bring your suture kit. Because I've got one of these packs that I've got ready. If I got to get up and go, I can get up and go. And a suture kit's part of my first aid kit in this pack. So I get over there, and I look at the horses, and I couldn't believe what I saw. You could actually see 4 distinct claw marks in the hind haunches of one, and 3 distinct claw marks in the neck of another. And I know from experience in studying big cats that this was not an attack by a big cat. Maybe on one horse, seeing how it was up by the neck. But on the rear haunches of the other one, I doubt it, because a big cat comes down from a top and attacks from behind. And it goes around the neck, and it goes to bite through the neck and sever the spinal cord and bring the animal down. That's how they take down an animal. But on top of this, the lean-to that he and I had built was just ripped to shreds. And, you know, I looked at Dave. I said, yeah, I can sew up your horses and that. I said, I can do that for you. I said, what has been going on? And they told me about it. Britta actually saw the thing looking in the window. And she said, Larry, it looked like a big wolf. She says, as a little girl, I remember the Little Red Riding story, she says, and seeing in the books. And she says, it looked like a big wolf. And I says, okay, that's interesting. And within a couple of weeks, actually it was a week, Dave and Trina had packed up everything they owned, moved to Tennessee, and put their house up for sale because of this. Now, even today, when you go back into where their house is, you still have that feeling you're being watched. And it's dead quiet. Like there's something there. And my wife and I went back there a little while ago, and we weren't even there 60 seconds. Didn't get out of the car or anything. And the wife says, we got to get out of here. I don't like it back here. She says, it feels creepy. She says, there's something watching us. Nobody was there. So we left right away. I wanted to actually get out and see if I could find any claw marks in the uprights from what was left of the lean-to. And I just find the whole thing very, very mystifying that it's probably still there. You know, and this has been, 17 years ago that this creature forced these people out of their house.
Episode 10, Wade Parker.
I was 13 years old. We lived just outside the small town of Metropolis, Illinois. Metropolis had about 7,000 people in it. I lived approximately 4 miles from town. We were out in a rural area. Most everybody that lived out by us all had a little bit of acreage. I think we had close to 30 acres. Everybody had at least 5 acres, I think, something like that. We had some woods on our property. My best friend at the time his name was Brian. He lived down about a 3-minute bike ride down the road from me. So we hung out all the time, and one night he and I decided that I'd spend the night at his house. He lived in a split-level home, which was fairly popular back then, which means it was built semi into a hillside. It had a basement that you could drive into, raise the garage doors. The basement was partially furnished. He and I were playing in the basement. This is, and I'm guessing approximately 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. Had a couple lights on. And on the basement wall was the window which went outside. The window was, looking back on it now, I'm guessing maybe 6 feet up high on the basement wall, which would have put it at ground level outside. The window was maybe 14, 16 inches tall and a couple feet wide. So anyways, he and I were just goofing around, and I remember at one point I just saw a movement of something in the window which really caught my eye. I turned and looked at it, and I said, hey, Brian, you see that? And he saw where I was looking, and he goes, yes. What I saw seemed to basically fill up the window, and it was the outline of the head was canine to me. It definitely had a snout, relatively long. The head in general was bigger than the average dog. It had ears in an upright position. They were pointed. And as far as the eyes, I don't recall any glowing eyes or anything like that. Looking back on it now, I remember seeing the eyes. I saw teeth, but the mouth was not open. And it was just staring at us. And I knew that that was not supposed to be there. So I would say we stared at it for 8, 10 seconds, something like that. And it tilted its head maybe 30 degrees. And then a couple seconds after it tilted its head, it started beating the window. And when it was beating on the window, it wasn't like it was trying to punch through the glass. It was more of hitting it up high and bringing the hands down. It was definitely hands. It was not a paw or anything like that. It was something that could grasp an object. And I can distinctly remember the clicking of the claws as they hit the glass. And it did it very fast. It was almost a blur. And pretty much at that point, he and I both started hollering, and we turned to the stairs, which went up into the house, and we were probably up the stairs in about 4 or 5 seconds into the living room. And his mother and father were sitting on the couch watching TV, and his dad kind of started hollering at us because we were making so much noise. We finally got him to listen and told him that there was some kind of monster outside. So he said, well, let's go take a look. So we all went out the back door, and by this time, probably a minute and a half at least had passed. And we went out into the backyard and around the side of the house, and of course there was nothing there. No, we didn't even have a flashlight to look for tracks or anything like that. Plus, whether he believed us or not, I'm not sure. The only other thing of pertinence is, near the house they had a large dog pen where 2 Irish setters were. What really struck me is these dogs barked nonstop at everything. The dogs were in the house, their house, and they were not barking, and they did not want to come out of their house. Even his dad realized that the dogs were scared of something. What did I see? Back then, I did not know. It didn't have a name. What I saw wasn't supposed to exist. Your mind works quick. When something happens to you, you can go through 1,000 thoughts in 5 seconds. And I just could not put an animal to what I saw. It looked like a big werewolf, for example. Whenever I've described the story to friends over all these years, back then the werewolves in movies and such really didn't look like what I saw. As I'm talking to you now, I remember I used to get some of the horror magazines and such, and some of the werewolves in those, drawn by artists, looked like that. But now, the Underworld movie series that's out, those werewolves look exactly like what I saw. Like I've said before, in today's times, you can tell somebody that you saw Bigfoot. They may laugh at you, but there's a possibility that they'll not laugh at you. Most people seem to be kind of accepting of the fact, well, maybe there's a chance. But how do you tell somebody that you saw a werewolf? And I'm pretty confident that's what I saw. I just had no name for it until recently, last few months, I started searching the internet, and I ran across the term Dogman. Shortly after that, I discovered you and started really just poring over everything, trying to gain as much knowledge as I could. So I'm 100% sure what I saw back in 1976 that night was a Dogman.
Episode 12, Cat Hansen.
I was almost 12, and back in the 70s, they come out with this really neat little round radio that was made by Panasonic, and it had a detachable handle, and it was a microphone, and you could put a cassette tape in it to record things, or you could play music, and this was all the thing. Well, I wanted one terribly and had to save money for it because I wasn't one of those rich children at the time. So I spent my summer babysitting, all summer long babysitting, and to get this thing. And when it came time, it was fall, and my father was telling me, well, we're not going into town to go get this. You can just wait until we're all done. Because unlike most families at that point in my lifetime, we were very food-oriented. My father hunted all fall long. Towards the end of summer, beginning of fall was when we deer hunted, we elk hunted, we bear hunted. Everything had to be, smelt fishing. We just had to do all these things to make sure that we had food for the winter and for the next year. And it was just the way that I was brought up. I mean, don't get me wrong, we weren't Okies or nothing like that. It was the way we were, period. And so that kind of took precedence over my needs. So growing up, all summer long, between babysitting, pulling nails for wood out of salvaged wood to build the chicken the houses, etc., the house for my raccoons, I just had a lot of chores, a lot of things, and the radio kind of took backseat. So it kind of stumbled into fall, and then I kind of forgot about it, and then spring came. In Oregon we get snow sometimes, but sometimes we go years without snow. Back then we got what was called a silver thaw, where it came, it snowed, and then it rained, and then it snowed, and then everything kind of froze over. So it had just thawed, and I had all this money. I'd been waiting all fall long to go do this, to go back to the gypsy camp that we had on the very, very, very back edge of our property. We had, you can call them homeless people, gypsies. Some of them had really funky little trucks that they had made into houses, school buses. There were actually 2 gypsy wagons, and at the time we just called them gypsies. And I knew that these people that were staying back there were like the coolest people in the world. I could go back and trade whatever I had money-wise, and I was just dead set sure that they would have this radio. They would get stuff by hook or by crook. They always had something. And I know it sounds terrible, but that's just the way it was. So my dad said that I could go back there to the very back edge of the property to go see them, to see if I could bargain with them and trade some money and some old clothes that I had and a radio, an AM/FM radio. People probably listening don't know what that is, but back in the day we had little transistor radios, and I thought I could trade them with some money and all these things, and maybe they would have this Panasonic tape recorder radio thing that I wanted. And so I went to my nearest neighbor, who was about, 2 miles down the road, who was another young girl. Her name was Becky. And I told her what I was going to go do, and she was all for it because she knew they had stuff too. So we talked our parents into letting us go, which was no big deal. They just wanted to know where we were going. So we said, we're going to go back to the gypsy camp. Okay, so it had been through this silver thaw, and everything was thawing out, like 2 days, maybe 3 days after the thaw, so it's real slushy, muddy. Oregon has some really deadly mud when it wants to. And the berry bushes, another thing Oregon's famous for is the blackberry brambles. They're everywhere. I don't care if you have a garden, you'll have a blackberry in it. So we were trying to work our way down the canyon. My dad had taken his cat, which is a type of bulldozer thing, and had made a dirt road down from the top of the canyon down to the bottom of the canyon where my creek was that I used to play in. And it wasn't like an asphalt road, it was a mud road. So you were used to traveling up and down it. I mean, that was just what we did. So Becky and I went down the road, across the creek. You had to take your shoes off or else leave them on. We wore these old flat white tennis shoes. Everybody wore them back then. canvas. So you were slipping and sliding on the rocks to get across the creek, which was, I want to say from my memory, it was probably about thigh deep, just about 6 inches above my knee. As we were crossing, it was cold because it had been freezing and raining, and it was really, really deep because of all the snow and everything that had happened. So we got kind of wet and muggy and sloggy, and we were just traipsing through the mud and the brambles to get back to where we were going. So we're probably about a mile into it, through the creek and everything, and we're hearing something in the cedar trees and the brambles, and I mean, you can't see 5 feet ahead of you. And literally, I mean, you could have your person stand in front of you, your friend, 5 feet from you, take a step to the left or right or behind a tree, and you would swear there was nobody around you. That's how dense the forest is. And we were hearing this thing mirroring, following, what I don't know, like copying us. We would step, it would step. We would stop, it would stop. And Becky was getting kind of nervous, thinking it was a bear. And I told her, I said, no, it's not bear. I said, maybe it's Steama. They're playing a game with us. Maybe there's a young one that's playing a game with us, because they would do that. And so I wasn't that afraid. But then, as the day progressed, we didn't get an early start in the morning either. We started out, I want to say, noonish or so, maybe 1, somewhere around there. And you could hear this thing. It just was following us. And every now and then you would hear like a snort. And like I said, I hunted and fished as a child. I started shooting birds and squirrels and things when I was 5 years old. So I would stop, and I told Becky at one point, I said, stop. The next time it makes a noise, let's look for fog, its breath, to see where it's at, because I was sure it was that close to us. So we did, but I still couldn't. I was looking, too. I was really looking for the fog or the breath or smoke. I don't know what you want, a theme. But I couldn't, never did find it. So this went on until we got towards the camp of the gypsy camp. It's just what I'm going to call it, because that's what I've always called it my whole life. And this thing had followed us and crashing and stomping and snorting the whole way. I mean, I'm not going to say I wasn't scared. I was. I was a little unnerved. Let's put that as unnerved. Becky was terrified because she'd never experienced anything like this before in her life. So we got back there, and the men that were in this camp were very rough and tough and just strong people who lived in the woods and traveled and did whatever they wanted to do. So they weren't real fearful of anything. And I remember them asking us, they said, who brought you? And I said, nobody. And they said, well, where's your uncle? Because I always had an uncle who would go back there with me to trade tools or something. And I said, no men came with us. It's just Becky and I. I came to trade for a radio. And they were so upset with us. I didn't understand at the time until maybe about an hour later, I would say. One of the guys was telling us that it was time for us to go home. Understand, please, I have dealt with these people since I was 5 years old, literally. I would sneak out of my room, climb down my balcony, and go run through the canyon at night. Okay, so they knew me. They had no problem with me at all. They knew I would always come back there and walk the woods at night. They were, they'd tell me go home, but this time they were different. They were really afraid for us. And they kept asking me, are you sure your uncle's not out? Is he hunting? Is he doing something? Where is he? And I said, no, we came by ourselves. And they said, well, did you bring a gun? And I said, no, I didn't bring a gun. I just brought my clothes and this radio, the radio and some money. I said, because I wanted to trade for this radio. So what ended up happening is they actually did have the radio that I wanted. And I traded them, and Becky traded a skirt and some other stuff. And then they assigned one of the guys to walk us home. And it was so strange to me because I'd never had this happen before. Out of all these times, all my whole life basically up to this point growing up, I'd never had them assign a guy, no matter how dark it was, to walk me home. So it really kind of made me wonder what was going on. I mean, it scared me, is what it did. It made me nervous. It made me a little antsy. And I felt like, when you're a kid and parents aren't telling you something, but you know something's wrong. So we started walking with this guy whose name was Anton, and he was walking us, and he kept telling us that there was something in the woods that wasn't right, and that his group was making sure that all their children and the wives and the elderly people that they had with them, which were like 3 or 4, were in camp before dark. And I thought he was just trying to scare me, because my uncles would do that, from time to time, like give you the warning, there's something out there and it'll get you if you don't go home. And I was like, okay, whatever. I'm almost 12. I know everything. I'm just brilliant, so I know it all. And I'm kind of rolling my eyes and looking at Becky and rolling my eyes, and she's telling us this stuff. Well, we start walking, and I don't know, we've been walking maybe an hour, and maybe 2. I'm not sure by then. I was more interested in the radio, to be really honest with you. I was taking it apart and flipping the mic up to show Becky how it worked, and not really paying attention to Anton. And I started noticing that he was getting really nervous and looking around, and he would stop us, and I was like, finally I remember looking at him and saying, well, if you don't want to be here, go. I can go home. I know how to get home. And he said, no, I have to walk you. And about that time that he said that, we heard this sound, like a huge, huge crunching, cracking sound, like a branch was being broken. I mean, not a little branch either, like a big branch. If you've ever split wood, pulled a rotten tree over or something like that, I'm talking like maybe 2 or 3 feet in diameter. There's like somebody had yanked a whole limb off of a tree, and you could hear it. And he froze. And I mean, that gun was cocked so fast, it would make your head spin. And I remember looking at him, and I kind of laughed at him. And I said, stop. I said, stay, Ma. You're in his land. You need to be, you need to stop. And he looked at me and he said, shh, be quiet. And I said, no. I said, it's just stay, Ma. And about that time we heard stomping. Okay? Stay, Ma, when they want to, they run and they will make the ground shake. It's almost like you can feel the vibration of them. Well, I felt that, but it didn't feel right. It wasn't as strong. So that, in my mind, convinced me that maybe it was a juvenile. So I said, please. I said, we're just being messed with. I said, I'm going to go home. So we started walking some more, and he was just so upset and looking around. And I kept telling Becky, I said, he's afraid. I was almost laughing because it seemed so comical to me that he was afraid of him. And then, I want to say maybe like 10, 15 minutes later after that, we heard this horrible roar. Okay, I've heard Stayama growl. I've heard Stayama yell. I've heard him whoop. I've heard him whistle. I've heard all kinds of things. And I have heard on a couple different occasions when the males are getting territorial, they will do this growl thing that they do. This wasn't it. This was something else. I mean, it shook my chest. And I swear that this thing was maybe, I felt like it was 5 feet, maybe 3 feet away from me in some brambles. I really did. I stopped and I looked at this guy, and he had just gone like white. And I looked at him and I said, are you going to finish walking us home? And he kind of shook his head. And then I'm not sure what happened. I don't know if he saw something and I didn't see it or whatnot, but it was the sun was starting to descend in the sky. That's how I want to say it, because it wasn't dark. It wasn't dusk yet. Okay? It really wasn't. You could still see, and it was fine, because most people know that when you're in the woods, especially the Oregon woods, it gets dark fast. And it's such a deep darkness that it's really dark. And where we were at, the leaves had fallen pretty much off of the trees that lose their leaves, because it was fall and wintry and slippery and nasty, and they were all over the ground. But we have cedar trees, we have fir trees, we have things that still have leaves, and even the brambles will get to where they're so overgrown that the leaves will fall off, but you still can't see through them. And I just don't know. To this day, I don't know what happened, what caused him to get this horrified look on his face. But I told him at that point, I was certain that maybe it was just staying off, throwing a fit because we were in his territory, and maybe it was a young one, maybe it was an old one. I just didn't know. But I knew it wasn't a cougar. I knew that because cougars scream. And bears, like I said, I've grown up with bears, and bears by then, they're gone. They're looking for another food source. So I turned around and I looked at this guy. I was a kid, so looking back on it, I can say he was probably 20, 23, somewhere around there, 24. So he wasn't that old, but much older than me, but he was older. And I told him, I said, fine, if you're such a fraidy cat, go home, I can look up the canyon wall and see my house from here, straight shot, I can see the lights because we had big floodlights in our yard up there because the raccoons would come, the cougars would come, things would come to raid the chickens, the pheasants, whatever. So we had these big floodlights, and you can see them casting out over the canyon. So I knew home was up there. I wasn't that concerned about it. Becky's crying. She's upset, because this guy's freaking her out, and I'm just want to get home, basically, to play with this radio. So I told him to just go. And he kept looking at me, and he offered me his gun. And I was like, are you crazy? Just go home. I'm fine. I'm not worried about it. Just go home. If it's a cougar, we'll figure something out. We'll figure out what to do with it. Don't worry about us. We're fine. So he left. He wasn't happy, but at the same time, I remember he kept looking back over his shoulder at us, like, are you girls serious? But, he was afraid, too, he wanted to get back to where he was coming from. And me, I'm just almost 12, I'm thinking, you're dumb, just go. So he took off, and Becky and I continued walking, and it was a little while later. We were kind of walking fast because Becky was scared, and she was crying. And I was trying to get her back there. And I was telling her, I'm telling her to be brave. And I'm kind of losing patience with her because she's what my dad called a sissy girl. She is my best friend, but boy, she sure does cry over a lot of stuff. And I'm trying to get her home. And I just want to get home. I'm cold. I'm wet. And the sun's going in the sky. It's going further down. And I am getting colder. And I just want to be home. So we start getting and walking, and this thing is following us the whole way through. And now I'm yelling at it. I'm yelling at it in Chata to leave us alone because it understands Chata real well, and I'm yelling at it. And I'm telling it, leave us alone, go home. I'm not going to be here much longer. I'm sorry I'm in your place. This is your land. I understand. Just let me get home. And the more I yell, the more upset Becky gets. So we finally reach the creek. Now, the creek is, like I said, is swollen, and it's full. And there's like a sand bar. It's not really sand, though. It's rocks and sand and debris and all kinds of junk from all winter long standing there, laying there, where the water comes up, and you can just kind of, it slopes a little bit, and then there's big rocks, and you got to get across it. So I told Becky, I said, one more time, we're going to get across. And we're almost home. Look up the wall. Look up the canyon wall. You can see the floodlight glow from my property up there, my dad's house. And she's like, I know, and she said, please, let's just go home. Well, at that point, I decided that Becky was being such a baby that to take this road, this muddy, slippery road, up and around would add time. So I thought, what the heck? We'll just go straight up the canyon wall. Okay, it's not rock. It's not like a rock canyon like the Grand Canyon. It is mud and rocks and brambles and small cedar trees, a couple pine trees. It's just Oregon where my dad had bulldozed through. So you could go up this wall, and then you would be at the edge of my property where my house sat, and looked out over the canyon. So it's a shortcut, and my dad had told me not to do this because of all winter long it had been raining and slick, and you could have a mudslide, you could start climbing up it and fall. But me being 12, I thought I knew everything, so I said, let's go up the canyon wall, and I'll get her out of my hair, get her home, and I can play with my radio. We were about, I don't know, halfway through the creek, maybe, and Becky was crying because the water was like ice cold, and she was trying to hold the stuff that she had gotten. They didn't have plastic bags back then that they gave you in the stores. They gave it to you in a brown paper bag, and she was trying to keep that up out of the water with the clothes in it, and the sun was going down, 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 and it was getting colder, and this thing had been following us and stomping and roaring, and it was just, my nerves were shot, and we were halfway across the creek, and I was trying to get her across the creek, and I heard this sound, this horrible, growling, rumbling, snarling. I mean, my oldest son tried to make a recording for me once to ask me if this is what it sounded like, and he had taken a gorilla roar and a lion roar and a tiger roar, and into the mix of that, he added the screech of a monkey, and he said, is this kind of what you heard, Mom? And it was very similar, but the only difference is it didn't have the bass to it. It didn't make your bones shake. Anyway, I heard this sound. We were in the middle of the creek, and Becky's ahead of me, and I turn around, and you're hearing all these branches and crunching and cracking. And I'm thinking, oh, crud, there's a steamrock right behind us. I'm thinking maybe it's a male that's mad or whatever, because it's all that's going through my brain is that we've infringed on his territory. Maybe that's the only thing that would make sense to me. But what stepped out of the brambles, it just tore through those brambles and those little trees that were right there. And it stepped out. And when I say step, it's like it's not on two legs. What I'm seeing is on four legs. But it doesn't look right. I've seen coyotes. I have never seen a wolf at that point up close except at the zoo. I'd always seen coyotes. And this thing stepped out of these bushes onto this sandy beach thing. And it stood there, and it was just huge. Huge. I've never seen a dog. I have big dogs, too. Now, as an adult, I have mastiffs. Growing up, I had one mastiff. This thing made my mastiff look tiny. It stepped out, and it had these huge, huge front withers, shoulders that were just massive. And it had a wolf's head on it. But it didn't look like a right wolf head. Its head was big, big, big compared to a coyote or a mastiff. It was so big, and its shoulders were just huge. And I remember standing there, and it just seemed like I could hear roaring in my ears. And I was just focused on this thing that was standing. I remember Becky was behind me. I remember hearing a splash. That was where she dropped her clothes, and the bag that was holding her clothes, and they just went off downstream. I remember all of this, but I was so focused on this thing. Becky was just screaming. And I looked at it, and then it did the strangest, most bizarre thing I've ever seen in my life. It kind of stretched and twisted halfway like a dog does when it's starting to shake. And then its leg kind of threw out to the side, its right leg in the back, and it started to stand on that leg. And then it kind of got all of its weight onto the right side of itself, and then the other side kind of twisted, and then it started to stand up. And I swear, as it started to stand up, it grew. It really did. It grew and popped. You could hear it. Things were popping that were not supposed to be popping. I mean, it was just, I was so focused, I could see everything and hear it. And Becky was freaking. She was running. I remember she left me. And this thing stood up and it kind of shook itself and it looked right at me. And that was when I realized I'm looking at a monster. I'm looking at something I've never seen before in my life. And it stood there and it was just like it was staring through me. And I was staring at it. And it still wasn't done. It was like it wasn't done adjusting itself or something. And so at that point, my mind was just total clear, and it said, get out. So I took off running. I'm falling in the creek, trying to get across these mossy rocks in the creek. Becky's halfway up the canyon wall ahead of me. She's grabbing trees, brambles. She doesn't care. I don't care. We start climbing this wall, and you've got these blackberry bushes that have been there for years and years and years. You know, I mean, they're thick, they're hard, and they're tearing at us, and we're grabbing those to get up. I'm tearing cedar trees out of the ground, baby cedar trees, trying to get up this hill, this canyon wall. And we're screaming bloody murder, because I know that my family is up above us doing chores, you know, because the lights are out. We've got wood. I mean, everybody's doing something. I know they're doing it. And I'm screaming and I'm yelling and I'm just screaming. And Becky's screaming. And we get, I want to say, halfway up the canyon wall. And we hear just holy hell below us. And I remember looking back over my shoulder and seeing those bramble bushes, those huge bramble bushes that go for miles down the canyon wall, you know, along the creek base. They just were being shredded. Things were being thrown up in the air. I mean, just like something was coming through them. And I'm looking and I'm screaming and I'm trying to climb at the same time. And then I hear my dad above us yelling. And I hear my uncle's voices. And I'm hearing my dad, but I can hear him, and I hear the word gun. And I'm thinking, oh, Becky, we're safe. They're going to shoot whatever it is. You know, I'm not so scared anymore. I'm just more focused on getting up above me. You know, and I'm shoving Becky up, trying to get her up ahead of me, and I'm pulling her by her shirt front because I'm smaller than she is, and I'm trying to drag her, get her up. I'm faster than she is. And I'm trying to get her above me. And I'm thinking, we're going to be okay. As long as we can see the light, we're going to be okay. And I knew it was below us. I just knew it because you could feel it as it's hitting that wall. It's climbing up after us. You know, and I knew it was there. And I didn't want to look down because I was so afraid that it was going to be right there and grab me. So I just kept focused on the light above me where my father was at and my uncle. And I get up there, and as I'm climbing, I can see my Uncle Buck's face look over the canyon wall. He's laying on his stomach, and he looked over the canyon wall, and the look on his face is just, these are big guys. These are hunters. These are people. I've watched my dad stare a bear down as it was coming at him for him to shoot. You know, and I mean, this bear was maybe 10 yards away from my dad. I mean, my dad never flinched. Okay, and my dad and my uncles are there up there, and these are the bravest guys in the world that I know. And I see my dad's head pop over, and he has a 30-06, and I see it come over my head. And the look on my dad's face is absolutely terrified. And they're yelling at us to climb, climb, climb. Becky's ahead of me. And my Uncle Buck reached down and grabbed her by the hand and jerked her up. I remember that because I was thinking at the time, gosh, Uncle Buck, you're being awful rough. You're going to pop her arm out. And then the next thing I knew, my dad's shooting over my head, and that breaks all the rules I've ever grown up with. You don't shoot a gun around over a person's head. You don't shoot when a person's in your line of sight. You don't do any of that. And I remember all these thoughts going through my head. You know, Daddy's breaking the rules. You know, why is he shooting? And my dad is actually almost crying, and he's screaming, and my dad never screamed. And he's telling me, climb, damn it, climb. And then the next thing I knew, my dad reached down, and I have really long hair. And he grabbed me by my hair and literally flung me up over the top of that canyon. He was laying on his stomach, reached down, grabbed me by my hair, and literally threw me over his head while he was shooting that gun. And if you know what a 30-06 is, it's a big gun. Okay, so that should give you an idea of how big my dad is for him to be able to shoot that one-handed. And I was thinking at the time, silly, stupid thought, Daddy, you're not supposed to shoot a gun one-handed. That's dangerous. As I was flying over his head and landing right beside him. And my dad is shooting down the canyon, and he's screaming, and he's yelling. And the next thing I know, he's standing up. I've got my uncles around me. They're shuffling me off to the house, you know, trying to make sure they're feeling bones, they're feeling everything. And all I remember at that point is my dad was crying, and he was yelling, "That's not Stayama, that's not Stayama." Because he was looking at it. Him and my uncles were looking at it coming up the canyon wall. And long story short, I was shoved into the house. Becky was shoved into the house. We were taken care of. All the doors were locked. I remember they called her parents. They came, and we, as adults, the adults were in the kitchen talking. And they were all sitting there talking. And I remember crying, and we were told that we weren't allowed to go back to the camp anymore. They didn't know what was out there. And for almost 4 years after that, until I was almost 16 years old, none of us kids were allowed down in the canyon after that. I mean, literally, none of us. We were not, that was a place that was totally taboo. We were not allowed to go down there. They did not care what was happening. We were told that there was something out there that was not nice and would kill us. To this day, I have moved away. I live in a place where it's pretty much desert and open sky. The mountains are here, but they're not the same mountains that are in Oregon. And I moved here for the reason that I can see things coming from a long way off. I have since learned what this being is, what my people call it, and what we believe it to be, but I don't want to interact with it ever again. I'm sitting here shaking like a leaf while I'm telling you this because the story is terrifying to me. I've remembered so much that I've told my children, all growing up, the story, and to make sure that they are aware of what's around them when they're in the woods. But I don't ever want to run into one of these things again. It's scarred and traumatized me for life.
Episode 34, Michael Lawrence.
It was my first backpacking trip. We were all together as a Boy Scout pack. We were all young Boy Scouts. We just got into Boy Scouts and graduated into Boy Scouts. I think we were tenderfoot at the time. So our scout leader took, 5 of us, I think it was, out to the Goat Canyon Trestle. And we drove down the wash, you know, as we were headed out there, and we got about halfway down the wash, and he said, "Okay, well, we're going to hike in from here." We're like, what? So we hiked down the wash. You know, it was probably just after the beginning of spring. So it was still pretty cool out there, but it wasn't over 120 degrees in the desert. I mean, it was, for a desert, it was cool. It was probably about 80. 85 maybe. But we hiked in, being our first backpack trip. We were taking it really hard. We were sweaty and exhausted, and got in there and got to where we kind of wanted to hike up to the trestle, and so we made camp. It was off the side of the wash, so there was a lot of sand out there and stacks of rocks or piles of rocks all over the place. We set up camp and we had dinner and sat around the campfire and told jokes and stories, and we all decided to turn in for the night. So still being kind of warm. You know, we didn't have the rain cover on our tents because it was crystal clear skies that night, and just so happened to be a full moon, so it was really lit up that desert. I mean, it was almost daylight. And if anybody's been out in the desert on a full moon, you can do anything without any light. It's just crystal clear, and it is bright as day. So we didn't have that rain cover on, and we were still pretty warm. And my friend who was bunking with me in the same tent, we decided to unzip our door. You know, it didn't have a window on it, but it was a nice light breeze, and so we kind of zipped it down, halfway down, and we turned in for the night, and we were sleeping, and I wake up in the middle of the night. I'm guessing 1:30 in the morning. Everybody's sound asleep, and I hear, like if anybody's walked through a dry wash, but the sound of footsteps in like a decomposed granite sand, just a rough sand. That sound of footsteps. It wasn't heel toe. It was more of a through the sand. And they were broad steps. Like they were large steps. I hear it getting closer. I couldn't make out what it was. First time I've ever been out in the wilderness. I was 15, I think, at the time. 14, 15 now, something like that. So I'm trying to think what it was, and then I suppose maybe one of the scouts or my leader was out going to the bathroom and just walking back to his tent. But then it kept getting closer and closer, and I can hear a deep, like sniffing sounds. But they were deep, like they were massive lungs. And I'm starting to get terrified. And so I'm not making a sound. I'm laying there stiff as a board. And then all of a sudden, I hear one more step closer to my tent, and then just inches away, my head is laying against it towards the back of my tent. Inches from my head, probably 5 inches, 6 inches. Side of my tent goes, and I can feel the back of my tent just pressed down on the back of my head. I'm terrified. And I'm sitting there, and I can hear it sniffing. I look up. As I look up, I see this thing lean over my tent and look down right at my face. He is standing right above me. All I could see, what looked like the one I backed into. The coyote type of looked like a giant coyote.
just looking down on me. And the eyes were reflecting like a amberish color. I couldn't see the pupils, but as I was looking around, I could see its eyes moving around. It would kind of turn its head a little bit and sniff around. It would move its eyes around, and I could see it reflecting the moonlight. And it's looking down on me. The look on its face was more of a, what are you doing here? Like, what is this? Curiosity type of look. And I'm staring at it and staring at me. And then I hear the zippers on my tent slowly going down. I don't want to look. Terrified. So I kind of looked down with my eyes, kind of tilted my chin down towards my chest a little bit so I can see down. I saw these hands that weren't people's hands. They were lanky, long, thick fingers. Almost like a mixture of if you were to take a wolf's paw and stretch out their toes and make them like fingers. And these claws as wide as their fingers and thick and black. Pulled down my door on my tent. And this thing steps in to my tent. It's kind of like it looked a little bit like the bigger one, but it was small. It had the look of a pup. You can tell a full-grown dog and a pup. And it had that younger look, like it was a pup. If this thing were to stand up, it would probably be maybe 4 feet tall, maybe 4.5. Really wasn't that big. But I could tell it was kind of a pup because its hands were too big for the proportions of its body. Like a dog growing. Like their paws get really big. You can tell how big that dog is going to be because of their paws. They haven't grown into their paws or their ears yet. It had that pup feeling. So this thing steps into my tent and sits down on my ankles. And it sits down. I had my feet kind of sticking up in my sleeping bag. And you know the top of your foot and that little arch in the top of your ankle where it meets your leg kind of sits down like right there. At that point, I literally pissed myself. It sits down on my ankle, and I can feel it reaches up, and it grabs my shin. I can feel its hand reach around my leg, just below my knee, above my calf, my shin. Not a heavy grab, just a
a white grab as kind of a support. And I look up at the big one, and it's kind of looking down at me as, don't you dare do a thing. Don't you move. And it had that serious look, like, don't you dare move. And this thing is sniffing around my tent. And I look down, and it leans towards me. Its weight was so perfectly distributed between its back legs and its hands on my legs, I couldn't feel the weight distributing. It leans towards my face, sniffs around. I see it open its mouth, and its tongue starts to come out, and I close my eyes, and it licks me right in the face. I don't know if I gasped. I don't know if I flinched or jumped. But I couldn't believe it. I thought it was a dream. In my mind, I'm thinking, no, 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 no. No, this isn't real. This is not real. This is a dream. I'm having a nightmare. And I close my eyes. No, this isn't real. I'm going to sleep. I'm asleep. I'm asleep. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm asleep. I have my eyes shut. And I open them. It's still there. I'm not asleep. That really happened. My friend was laying next to me. He rolled over, just like you do in the middle of the night, just kind of rolling over, and I think it startled him. The thing jumped back out of my tent so fast, it never pushed off my legs. It just used its hind legs and jumped back. Didn't hit my door, didn't hit my tent, landed outside my tent. I looked up, the big one looked at me, turned, and ran up the hill behind me. Behind us, there was a little tiny hill with just granite rocks. I heard it take a couple steps, and I can hear its claws just dig into that granite as it was climbing over those rocks to get away. It was gone. I looked at my tent, and the small one kind of just sat there for a second, just staring at me, and turned and walked away on all fours, just like nothing had ever happened. Being in shock, I never slept a wink that night. I stayed up all night long. Never heard anything again. Never saw anything again. But when everybody started getting up, getting ready for breakfast, the other scout that was sleeping in my tent with me, and he woke up, and I asked him, "Hey, did you see that last night?" And he said, "See what?" I said, "Did you see that coyote or something come into our tent?" He said, "What?" I said, "Yeah, like a coyote or something came into our tent." And he's like, "Man," he's like, "You're dreaming." He's like, "No." I said, "Yeah, look at the door." He's like, "Oh, you did that. You probably went out and went to the bathroom and didn't flip it back up." No, I didn't. We get breakfast, and I'm walking around, kind of cleaning things up, and just to solidify what I saw, I kind of just walked around the backside of the tent where I was, and I saw those huge tracks. Huge. They were much, much bigger than my hands. Probably about 3 times the size of my hands. My hands fit right inside that track perfect. I did see what I saw. And I told my scout leader, I said, hey, I told him what I saw. And he told me, well, like, are you sure? Because there's no such thing as anything like that. There's nothing that big. This is your first time camping away from home and backpacking. You were probably exhausted. You were dreaming. It wasn't real. That didn't happen. Wanting to believe that, I think in some way, I convinced myself that it really didn't happen until my second sighting.
Episode 17, Kirk Stokes.
My first encounter happened in 1991, about a year after I had graduated from high school. And to know me back then, all I pretty much was into was fishing. I ate, drank, and slept it. So in 1991, and it was about the second week of August, I had a couple buddies call me, and we decided to go to a lake here in Spencer County, Kentucky. We would frequently go later in the year when everybody pretty much had free time. And we decided to go on a 2-day, kind of just fishing, camping. But when we camped, we would normally, it would not be tents. We would just go and use roll sacks, knapsacks. It had to be kind of cold for us to use a tent. So that's basically what we would do. We would just go on a 2-day, and this is something that I enjoyed, they enjoyed, and it was pretty much just catfishing, bass fishing, and just making the 2 days out of it. So we had, I guess you could say, as we had got there that day and set a place to actually do the fishing where we wanted to do the catfishing, we had, it was a place where along the lake here in Spencer County, there's a lot of private land, there's a lot of public land. So one of my buddies had known somebody that owned property basically that ran down to the part of the lake. And it was not an area that was hard to get back to if you knew how to get to it. I would say when we got down to the place where we were going to camp and fish, me, myself, and my 3 buddies had got set up for the day for fishing. And me and my best friend at the time would normally pick a spot along the shore, and we would catfish, while the other 2 buddies would walk on down probably a mile, 2 miles, and do some bass fishing. And if the bass fishing turned out to be good, then we'd move and go join them. Well, in this time, as we started catfishing, which you don't do a lot, you just, throw out your bait and you sit and you wait, I started noticing things behind me up in the woods as it's sloped on both sides. So the woods are deep, and the woods that we came through are deep. So as we sat in the first probably 4 hours, I kept having pebbles thrown. And at first I thought it was my buddy Jim. I just kept asking him, Jim, cut it out. It's getting old. Well, he told me he wasn't doing that. So as I kept fishing, we were fishing, it kept going on more. I kept hearing more and more stick breaking. To me, it sounded like deer. I passed it off as probably deer at this time in the year up there. So as we probably finished up, as it was getting darker that day, and we didn't do that bad in the fishing department, everybody met back up to the place that we were camping out. As we started getting setting up for the night, because we were planning on staying there and doing one more day of fishing, we all, at this time, we didn't build fires normally. We would have lanterns. It wasn't really cold enough to have a fire, so we really didn't mess with it in August. And with me, I usually carried a bunch of tackle, and I usually had 2 big boxes of fishing tackle, and I usually had about 10, 12 poles. And I had quite a bit of money invested in these things, because that's all I did. As it got darker, I first noticed the breaking again in the dry wood and the dead wood, everything in there. To where we were camped, there was a tree line, and it was on my side. And we were probably camped about 15 to 20 feet away from the tree line. It was a nice little plateau up. It was probably about going on 9:30, and it was just about dark. We were all sitting around. I used my tackle box as a seat, because I had the big ones, and it was pretty heavy. And my buddy Jim next to me was sitting on the tackle box as well, mine. And the 2 other guys that I knew, they were sitting, I think, in the pull-out chairs or something like that. And we were all sitting there and just kind of how young guys do, joking around and laughing and cutting on each other. I had heard a crash, and I've been out, like I said before, many times where you would hear where you would think you would know it was deer making runs. But this crash at this time, and I'll remind you, it was pitch black except for the lantern they had. The sound that came from as I was hearing it from my right ear, it was as loud. It sounded like a bulldozer coming through that area. And at this time, I kind of, when everybody looks at each other and nobody wants to say nothing, because they don't really, I guess, want to tell you they're scared. But I know personally I was getting a little worried. The next thing I knew, after the sound where it sounded like a bulldozer running through there, it sounded like whatever it was had come right to the tree line. And at this time, I always carried a little flashlight. I pulled out the flashlight and made a run on the trees. I didn't see nothing. I did another quick run, and bam, this was we were about, like I said before, about 15 to 20 yards away from the tree line. But as I shot the flashlight the second time, I caught what was the most ferocious looking face of a canine. But it was, I only saw one side of the face. It would be my right looking at, I guess, its left side of the face. And it was looking down on me. And what I remembered most in that time when I hit it with the flashlight, the eyes on the left side, I only saw one eye, but it was like a cow's eye, and the eye was set back, way back, on the side of the head. And the teeth were defined. I mean, it was canine. And in that instant, the only thing that I knew was, instinctively, was run. So in that short period of time, I got up, forgetting about the tackle box behind me. I tripped right over that. It just fell right on my back. That's when I guess I went into full paralysis, panic attack, or from what I know now, and laying on the ground just waiting for this thing to come out. Just waiting for it to come out. And it seemed like forever, and it never came out. It never came to get me, and this is happening, I guess, in a split second. So, next thing I know, I'm getting up, I'm running. Well, I'm noticing my buddies aren't there. They must have took off when the crashing started, and they must have just took off. So, I'm running back to the truck, and they must have already been there by, I don't know. They were already by the time I'm talking about, it was about 1,200 yards from where they parked the truck, where we left it, to where we were camping. I get back to the truck, and the doors are locked. They're all in the truck, all sitting in the front seat. They open the door, and I'm in shock, you know. I'm just really in shock. I get in the truck. We're sitting there. At first, I'm just trying to get my bearings on what just happened. As I'm sitting there, I think about 35, 40 minutes must have gone by. I'm starting to get kind of mad because, first of all, because my buddies took off, and I didn't realize it at the time. And I'm kind of, if you know me, I'm kind of a guy of loyalty, where me and my buddies always had a kind of a pack of, you know, I got your back, you got my back, and I don't know if that was just part of what I was experiencing there and all the shock and everything, but that was one thing that just stuck out to me after what just happened. So after sitting for about 35, 40 minutes, I had all my equipment down there, all my fishing tackle, all my poles, and I was not going to leave those because I had too much money in that. That's something I was not going to leave. And I also had my cigarettes down there, and two of us smoked, and at that time I needed a cigarette. So I went back and took another flashlight, and I also took a 12 gauge that they had, one of my buddies had, because they did not want to go back down there. So I went back down there, got my stuff, got my tackle, my 2 boxes, my rods, and came back, and they had to get their stuff because I was not going to, at that time I was not very happy about what they had took off on me and kind of left me there. They eventually went, got their stuff. I waited at the truck, and pretty soon we decided to just head on home. And on the way back, we didn't talk about it. Everybody was really silent. And from that day on, for about 5 years, my best friend that was with me never would bring it up. And I never did bring it up to any of the other ones because they act like they didn't really want to talk about it. I just kind of kept it hush up, kind of quiet. That's basically the very first encounter I had with something like that.
Episode 40, Lisa.
My stepson had gone out to use his mobile, which you could only use out near the shed where we used to park the cars. It's a big shed. He was on one side of the barn. My husband was standing outside, on the veranda, not outside, on the veranda. He was looking straight at Kevin. He could see this Dogman coming around from the back of the house. Kevin was at the front of the barn. There was the house, the barn. Kevin was standing in front, and this thing was coming, like, circling around from the back. It was night time. We had all the lights on because we had big spotlights out there. Kevin was talking on the phone, and he was one side of the barn and the Dogman was the other. My husband was yelling out to him to get inside. Very panicked. He had a panicked sound to his voice, and that alerted me. And I've looked out the kitchen window, which you look out the kitchen window and you're looking at the barn to the side. My husband repeated again, Kevin, look behind you, get inside. And as he said that, he's come inside, he's locked the door, bolted the door. Kevin's looked behind him and started running because by then he could see it. And he's come in the side gate, and he knew that we would have bolted the door, so he's come for the window, which I had open to come in, like it was a big window. He's jumped through the window, I've slammed the window shut and locked it, and I was face to face with it. So I copped the full brunt of that one, because it was the eyes. It was so close behind him, it was incredible. The window would have had to be about 6 foot off the ground again, and it was looking straight at me through the window. And well, I've no hesitation in saying if it had got in, we would have all been ripped to pieces. That particular one that I saw up close, it was black. It had black fur, the shape of the ears, like what I've seen on documentaries of wolves. Of course, we don't have wolves over here. It was a different thing again to the first encounter that I saw. It was totally different. It had the mane, like a big wolf's mane, big shoulders, but it was mainly the eyes that got to me. It was, yeah, it was the eyes. That's mainly what I noticed with it, was the eyes, the eyes, the intelligence and the intent and the rage that it had in its eyes. Because once you've looked it in the eye, it seemed you can grasp the intent that it's got, the anger, the intelligence, very highly intelligent. I don't care what anybody says, these things are intelligent. If anyone, please, if you ever see it, don't look it in the eyes, please.
Episode 43, Wily Dave.
Let's see, I guess I was at work on, I've been that Friday afternoon. It was actually getting along just about deer season, you know. It was actually bow season. So a lot of the guys at work were already bow hunting, you know. So I'm getting ready to have knee surgery here pretty quick. I banged my knee up in a previous accident on a job site, so I favored that thing as long as I could, and I couldn't get up in my tree stand anymore like I wanted to, so I decided I'd just do my calling expedition of the coyote hunting where I could walk back into the truck easy. That's what I was going to do until I got it fixed. So I was going to go out. That's what they asked me, Dave, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to go on a safari with my camera and maybe shoot a big coyote. So they said, well, you know, good luck. We're not going out there in that godforsaken country with you, so that's just too far to go, and it's just too desolate, you know, because that's the way they believe. They don't want to, nobody's going to see anything. So I got my stuff ready on Friday night, and I usually leave out early. I can drive there in about 3 hours, 3.5 hours. So I come home, got my things ready, got a little sleep, got up about 1:30 in the morning and headed out. And it's just a long, dark drive out there, headed west, till you get into the country. So at daylight, I pulled into a stand and got my pack out, got my camera out, and the goal was to call as many coyotes to the camera as I could and get some good recent photographs, because some of the ones, if you publish these photographs in magazines, people that read magazines or look at them a lot, they can say, well, I've seen that picture before. So you want to try to get new stuff all the time or a different coyote if I want to do any more magazine work. So I want to have build a new stockpile of fresh pictures, when I start writing again. So I was getting everything ready, got it all set up, went to my first stand, and the first stand I called in about 2 or 3 coyotes on the stand, and had them come really close to the camera, and I got good pictures, kept them there for a few seconds, and they cooperated really well. They posed really good for me, so I got some good photographs. And I did this, multiple times there that morning. I have a predetermined route that I wanted to drive, and it covered about 30 miles, so I drove that route, and just about every stand I had action on, I was able to call. I think that morning and up into about lunchtime, I called about 25 or 30 coyotes and took their pictures. So not every one cooperated where I could get full body shots of them, but I got really good pictures of most of them. And the plan was to start back out of the Kansas line and come down and make a circle around through the river bottom and call a couple of places there towards the evening that I'd called in years past that had produced some big coyotes. So I thought, well, if I can, I can shoot one of these big ones, I'll put one more on my wall. And I've got, you'd asked me about that before, I've got 16 here in Oklahoma that go over 60 pounds. And the big ones I try to keep. And if I'm going to shoot one that time of year, I want him to be a big one. I won't shoot a small coyote or a medium-sized one. I've killed over 10,000 of them. I don't have to kill one just to kill it. So I was looking for a big one, So I stopped at a pump jack and ate a sandwich and just turned the radio on in my truck and just kicked back and was listening to the radio, and had a couple hours to kill till the sun got over to where I figured it was about right to start hunting those other stands. Because when you're doing work with a camera or a rifle, you try to keep the sun to your back. You want the sun in the animal's eyes. That way he can't make you out. And these I don't know how much you know about coyotes. I'm sure you know some. The predators make their living out there. They're not stupid, so the advantage is always in their back pocket. So they try to circle, so and they use the wind in their sight and ears. They hunt with all 3 senses to try to pick you out where you are. So I wanted that sun directly to my back. And when the sun got over to where it was about right, I thought, well, I'd make a few stands. So I'd hunted the river. I'd made 3 or 4 stands, and I called in 2 small coyotes and 1 small bobcat. And it wasn't first season, so I couldn't shoot the bobcat, but I only shoot the big ones. There again, I'm always after the trophies. I've got 7 cats on my wall that go over 46 pounds. So they're pretty large cats in the area too. But you got to know how to get them in there. The right sound's the only thing that'll bring them in. And I called that cat in. He wasn't a big one, so I let him go. So this last stand I was saving because it was my best stand for that evening, and the wind wasn't in the perfect position, but the sun was going to be right. So I thought, well, I can sacrifice that wind a little bit because I'm going to be hunting in elevated position where my stand is, and the wind will be blowing over that draw high enough where the coyotes will come in under me, and I'll see them before they see me. So I could still get, a good rifle shot at 100 or 200 yards before they winded me. So I got out of the truck. I parked the truck about 200 yards away, and I got my gear ready. And as soon as I stepped out of the truck, I noticed something was different. I saw these tracks in the road, and I thought, that ain't right. I looked at that track, and the track was about the size of the palm of your hand. I've tracked mountain lions for miles, And a mountain lion track is a big track when a cat puts his foot down, but there's no toenails. When a cat puts his foot down, there's no toenails unless he's running. And there was no toenail marks. So, the toenails were definitely fine. But the only thing that was there was a 3-toed track in the road. And it looked like something had set down because you could see the heel of this animal. And it was about, from the front toe to the back of the heel was about 9 inches. I looked at it and I thought, man, I've never seen nothing like that. So I thought maybe it was just an anomaly of some kind. Maybe a stick had got rolled over into that track or something, and it didn't give it too much thought. So, being out in the elements like you are, I know you probably drove some hump roads yourself. When a pickup drives down a well road or a pump road, it's kind of the two places where the tires follow, and the center has a high spot in the road. And the grass usually grows right there. Well, that's the way this thing was walking. It had its foot kind of up on that grass. And I could see a track, and then I couldn't see a track. I'd see part of a track, and then I wouldn't see a track. So this went on for about 150 yards until I got up to the edge of the canyon. And then I had to cross over into some soft dirt, and I got up there to where this tank battery was, over to the edge of that. I walked around the edge of this log and before I got out into the actual, the sagebrush and stuff to sit down where I was going to get cameled up and make my stand, and I seen these tracks going off down this draw, and it was those same tracks again, about the size of my hand, and you could see the toenail marks, and these were huge, and I thought, man, what in the hell is that, It went off and dropped off into the rocks, 3 or 4 steps there, and it dropped off into the rocks, and I couldn't see it anymore. So I thought, that, of course, I didn't have my camera with me at that time. It was getting dark, and I just had enough light to make a stand with my rifle. So, still enough light for plenty of shooting. If I'd had the camera, I could have took pictures of it, but no time to go back and get the camera and photograph the tracks. So, I went ahead and set up, got my shooting sticks out, got my pack off, and got it set down, and the rifle I was hunting that day was with the rifle I took with an AR-15, and it's a heavy barrel, what they call a sniper version, a heavy barrel rifle. It's a stainless barrel, 20 inches long, very accurate gun for a 223, and had a really good scope on there, and it's one of the best ones you can get, Night Force 315 power, and I had two different scopes that I put on there, back and forth, and then swap them around. I've got several different scopes. I think that day I had the Boston long one there, the military. That's right, I did have it on there that day because I took it off the night before and sighted that rifle in. That's right, I did have the Boston long one there that day. Okay, so I got everything set up and because I was shooting my mil-dot reticle, and I had on full camouflage, had on scent lock suit, which is I don't know if you're familiar with those, but that's a charcoal type suit that hunters wear to knock down the human scent. And I always spray down with a scent spray on top of that just for extra measure. So full camouflage, scent lock suit, full camouflage. There was no way that the animal could have seen me. And the truck was totally concealed from that position. So I got my call out, got everything set up, and I glassed the area for about 2 or 3 minutes to make sure there was not a coyote standing out into the draw. I didn't want to blast him off the prairie, or scare him off with too loud of a series when I first started out. So I set the binoculars down, loaded my rifle, and got my call, and I made my first series. And this call that I'm talking about is one that I had made. It's a special call that I built, and it's actually the first time that I'm trying it out. It's a totally new sound. So, keep in mind the wind's to my back, a light wind about 3-4 miles an hour from the north, and I'm facing to the south. And I made the first series of the call, and about 30-40 seconds on the call, and I waited and slowly glassed the canyon, and I couldn't see anything. And this draw that I'm hunting goes up into a big curve. It's a big dry, what we call a dry wash, and it goes up into a big curve. It goes around there for 3/4 of a mile. And I waited, didn't see anything. So I took another breath and I started in on the second series of the call. Made another squalling sound. And about halfway through that series, I see something black coming out of the shadows and down on the lower part of the canyon. And when I first saw it, I thought, what in the was that? A black bear. That's what I thought it was, because it was the same size as a bear. At that distance, I thought, what the hell is a black bear doing this far from the Rockies? Because we've never seen any bear tracks there. I've never heard of any ranchers seeing a bear or anybody even reporting one that far east, So I just could not believe it was happening. I thought, well, this is going to be a first. So I waited and didn't make any more sound, and it stopped. They were down in the shadows for a second. So I went ahead and blew a little bit more of a series, made a few sounds on the call, and it went ahead and started up towards me. Then it come out into the light where I could see it good. I still think it's a bear. It's out there about a little over 1,000 yards, and I can see it coming. So now it's picked up speed, and it's really running hard down through the sagebrush. So it gets all the way up to about 400 yards and stops. Well, then I just, put the binoculars down. I went ahead and got on the gun, and I got it sitting on a set of shooting sticks, so I got it plenty sturdy. And I'm looking through my scope, and I got it on 10 power because that's where we normally range things. We use a mil-dot reticle, the same thing the military uses and they teach their snipers to use in combat. And, of course, we got laser rangefinders and all that stuff, but it's just quicker to use. If you're already on the scope, less movement, you can just go ahead and use the mil-dot. So that's what I was using. And when it got to 400 yards, it stood up on 2 feet. And that's when you have that you've had those feelings where it just kind of goes over you, what the and then I had to look again. So I looked through my scope, and this thing's standing on 2 feet. It ain't no bear. It don't look like a bear. No bear's that tall. This thing was 8 foot tall in the reticle. And I ranged it twice to make sure. Made sure I had my reticle set exactly on 10 power so I could get everything to the right mil rating that I wanted. It was 8 foot tall. So I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. So I looked at it. I slowly cranked the scope up on 24, and then I looked at its head, and that's when I really got psyched out. This thing had a dog snout. It looked like a dog in the face. It had a dog's nose. The head was massive. I mean, it was just a huge black head. I could see the eyes. The eyes were not really big. They weren't just massive eyes, maybe the size of a bottle cap or a marble or something. But I could see that animal's eyes. I was looking right into his face on that 24 power, the 24 power setting on my scope. And I could see the wrinkles in his nose. But what really shocked me was it had these ears that were about 4 inches tall on each side of his head, and it looked like a Dogman pincher. And those ears were flicking back and forth. They were moving. He was looking for the sound of that call. He was looking where it come from. And Vince, I'll tell you, I don't get rattled very easy. I mean, I'm a trained shooter. I know how to shoot a rifle. I've got a lot of experience. I don't get buck fever. I don't get excited. I've made some great shots on coyotes at long distance. And this thing, it had me shook a little bit. The hair actually stood up on the back of my neck. My heart was beating fast, and I normally don't get that excited. But I knew something was not right. I thought, man, I've never even smoked dope, and people with the smoked dope would pay to see this. So it was definitely a weird deal. I thought, man, I have to get myself together here. What am I looking at? And so I looked again. I turned the scope back down just to make sure I wasn't seeing things. I turned it back up, same thing, but I could see the ripples in that nose, and then it snarled a little bit, and I could see its front fangs. It had front fangs and it had bottom fangs. Not like I've done some research, and it's not like people say, well, did it look like a boar's head or a pig? No, it was not a pig's nose. It was not pig fangs. It was canine fangs and a canine nose and snout. It looked exactly like, people said, well, did it look like this? It looked like that. And I said, I'll tell you what, watch the movie Van Helsing, and you'll see what it looked like. Only this one was solid black. And that's what I saw. That's exactly what I saw. And I was totally freaked. But the thing about it was, I didn't I didn't know what to do. I mean, at first I thought, man, the size is what shocked me. The shoulders were probably 4 feet wide. It looked, it looked like a Sasquatch on top. Wide shoulders, huge, massive forearms. The hands, well, it wasn't dog feet in the front. It was hands like a man. You could definitely see the defined fingers. These hung down below the body, and this thing was kind of bouncing on its back feet, moving. And you could tell it was hands, and it was looking from left to right. And I didn't know. I thought, well, if he starts this way, I'm not going to shoot him at 400 yards. But if he starts this way, what am I going to do? So in Oklahoma, we're not allowed to carry more than 5 rounds in an automatic rifle in a magazine, in the AR or any Mini 14 or any kind of a automatic fired weapon. So the state law reads that in the regulations. So most of the guys that I hunt with, we all try to go by. I have game warden friends and stuff. We all try to go by the state law and do what they say for us to do. So I had 5 rounds in the gun. So I carry an extra 20-shot magazine to keep my extra rounds in. Well, I just took that 5-round magazine out and laid it on the ground. I put that 20 in. So that gave me 21 rounds because I already had one chambered. And I figured, well, if this thing rushes me, I'm going to have to wait till it breaks 100 yards before I can do any damage, because the AR-15 with a 50-grain varmint bullet in it's not going to, at 400 yards, it's not going to have the penetration that I need to hurt it bad enough to kill it. So I knew that I was in trouble. If I had to shoot it at 100 yards, that was going to be it. I only had 20 rounds. I normally carry a 1911 with me, but I didn't have it on that day. It was back at the truck. It was in the truck, but it was back in the holster in the console. So I didn't have it on because I didn't think I was going to need it. But I knew I had 20 rounds, and all I could do was wait until it broke 100 yards and start giving him the whole magazine, and hopefully it would knock it down and kill it. But if it didn't, I knew I was going to be in trouble. But I was definitely worried about that because I knew that the rifle I was shooting did not have the knockdown power at 400 yards to take care of business. When you see something like that, I mean, you think, I wasn't even thinking about that movie Van Helsing or any of that stuff at that time. I wasn't thinking about any of that. I was trying to think about, what am I going to do if this thing don't die when I shoot it with this AR-15? I mean, I know what that gun will do at 100 yards. I mean, it'll kill, you could probably kill a hog with it at 100 yards. You got enough firepower to do it at 100, but not 400, because the bullet only leaves the muzzle at about 3,100 feet a second, and it don't get faster. It dies off out there the farther it goes. But a 50-grain bullet doesn't have the inertia to carry the energy to do anything really significant to an animal that size. This thing was the size of a Sasquatch. It had huge shoulders, big forearms, and the chest was massive. And then it got down to the waist part of it, and the waist down towards that part of the body was still bigger than anything you'd want to see. But the legs is what I couldn't believe, is how the legs went down just like a dog. It was standing on like a dog's feet. I could see the whole body up and erect, and I thought, it was 150 yards to the truck, and I got a bad knee. I got a banged up knee. There ain't no way I'm outrunning this sucker. I ain't gonna be able to hit him with a gun when I'm done. So, I mean, if 20 rounds don't do it, I'm probably gonna become dinner. So, I mean, this thing was real. This wasn't a figment of the imagination. It was the only time that I've ever been to where I was actually didn't know what I was going to do. I mean, I knew that I couldn't run. I knew I was going to have to hold my ground. It's kind of like one of them deals in the military, I guess, where you got so much ammunition, you're fixing to be overrun. So this is it, do or die. What are you going to do? You're going to have to hold your ground. There's nothing. You can't go anywhere. You got to take care of business.
In the last encounter for the night, episode 52, Billy.
I was in Wyoming. I lived in the very south part of Wyoming on the border there with Utah. And I had to go to a training session for work in Bozeman, Montana. So I went up there and I spent a few days. And it was May of 2010. I remember this exactly because usually that's wrapping up the end of wintertime in that area. That year, specifically May, we was having some pretty heavy snowstorms. But anyway, I left from Bozeman, Montana, heading back home down South Wyoming, and the snow started picking up, and it was getting heavier and heavier and heavier. I ended up messing up on my route, and I ended up heading right into Yellowstone National Park, and the roads were closed to there that time of the year. So I ended up having to go find my way around this other route, and I ended up on this road. I'm pretty sure it's called Teton Pass. I tried Google mapping it the other day after I spoke with you, and I'm pretty sure it was Teton Pass, Highway 33 or something like that. Anyway, there's a big pass, a big mountain pass that crosses from Idaho over into Wyoming. And I wasn't sure if I was in the Wyoming side or the Idaho side, but the snow was getting really heavy. And I got on this big mountain pass, and I had a bunch of switchbacks or cutbacks where you go back and forth going up, and then, back and forth or around going down. And I can remember hearing on the radio the alert come on that the pass was closing. And I could see the flashing yellow lights on the sign that they put to close the road behind me when I was going up the mountain. So I was like, wow, I'm the last guy on this pass, on this road. If everybody else, is off and nobody's on, I'm the only one on this stretch of road or this pass. So anyway, I made it to the top, and I remember it was getting so bad, the roads were so slick. I didn't get to the point where I done took my seatbelt off and opened my door of my truck, not all the way open, but I cracked the door because I was waiting for myself to slide off that mountain, or off that pass. I was worried pretty much when I was sliding off there. Anyway, I just started down maybe 3 turns going down, and I'm saying 3 turns, I'm not exactly sure, but it was about that long. I seen a whole big bunch of big orange sheep. I believe that's what they call them, big horn sheep. I'm from the South. I'm not too familiar with if the big horn sheep or the mountain goats, one or the other. I'm pretty sure it's a big horn sheep. Anyway, there was a bunch of them, and they was actually pushing into each other. They was ramming their chest and their necks into each other, like trying to push each other out of the way, like, get out of my way, I need to go, move, move, move. And like they was scared to death. You could see it in their eyes. Their eyes was wide open. They was heading up the mountain. I was going down. They was coming up. And I was like, whoa, that's cool. I've never seen one of them in real life. And I know they're pretty rare to people hunt them down to, climb up mountains, do a lot of hiking and a lot of time just to hunt one of these things down. And now I see a whole herd of them, a whole bunch of them. I was like, wow, that's cool. And I remember it's just getting dark. It's just getting dark. But if you know anything about snow and at nighttime, if there's any kind of anything like that, snow lights everything up pretty bright. So, but it was just getting dark, and I tried to get a picture of them, and I couldn't already make it out. I mean, I just could see the rear end of one of them, so that sucks. But anyway, I made another pass or 2 coming down, and there was another set of them. I mean, they was moving. They was coming up that mountain fast. They was, I remember coming up on them, and I was trying to stop, and I wasn't going very fast, and I was sliding. And it's like, oh crap, I'm gonna hit them. I'm gonna hit them because they ain't stopping. They ain't worried about me. They worried about getting the heck out of somewhere. They was moving. They was going. Anyway, there was something else I seen that night that I meant to share with you that I kind of put the pieces together later about what I think it could have been. But I seen a baby deer. He was young and a little one. He had spots all over him. And he was out there by the road, and he was looking around. I was looking for Mama deer. She was nowhere around. I was like, wow, well, that's odd to see a baby deer by itself, that young, looking around. I wouldn't say he had spots on him, but he was young. I don't know if he was orphaned or if he was a runt or what. But he was a little bitty deer, and he may have didn't need a mom or whatever. But anyway, I don't even know what time they even born up there. Anyway, I come on down, and I ran into a car. There was a car on the side of the road, and remember thinking, wow, I'd hate to be stuck up here, broke down. And, well, I was thinking, well, I'm going to check this car out and see if maybe I can see if their license plates. Maybe if they're local, I'm sure somebody else can help them quicker than I can. If they get a cell phone, I couldn't do much for them. If they're out of town, I want somebody to help me out. A place like this, being stuck out of town, so I'm gonna stop. I remember stopping up to there beside them, and I couldn't see their tag. It was packed. The snow was packed all over it. And I looked in the window, and there was nobody in the car. So I continued on. Well, a little ways on down the road, I noticed there was a big black mass on the right side of the road, and it looked like maybe there was a really large person in a big coat in a ball, but it was really big, and I just couldn't place what it would be, and then I remember worrying, thinking, maybe the owner of that car had gotten out and tried walking down the mountain, and the cold got them, or they slipped in the road. Maybe somebody hit them, or somebody slid into them and hit them, and they kept going and got scared. All that stuff's going through your mind because there wasn't no snow on this black thing. The snow was coming down hard. It was sticking everywhere, and it was, it was odd. So I was like, well, it could be a person. Snow's not sticking. Maybe body heat, whatever. Maybe it's more than one person, and they balled up under, a blanket or something. That stuff's going through your head. You just can't quite see good. It's snowing pretty hard, and it's blowing. Well, I pulled up behind it, fairly close, but not that close. And I opened my door. I got out, and the wind was blowing, and you could hear the wind whipping through the trees. And the snow was so bad it was sticking to my eyelashes where I was trying to keep out my eyes. I couldn't see hardly. And then I walked up to it, which I found out when I got close that it was behind it. And I was trying to make out what was going on. And about that time, I heard a bone break, tendon tear, meat rip, or some kind of, crunch or tear. And at that same exact moment in time that I heard that, I noticed I was looking at the back of a wolf head, a very large wolf head that was squatted down, bowed over, and what I was looking at was the back. It was the back of the thing. It was a big black mass. You couldn't really tell what it was like that. You don't expect to see anything living that big person. Anyway, at the moment I realized what I was looking at, I turned my head to the side to get out of there. I was going to turn and take off. Well, right when I turned, I'd say not turned because I'd be turned, but I'd say as I was turning side, this thing looked over its shoulder at me. If I'm looking at it and it's looking away, it looked over its left shoulder at me. It looked over its left shoulder, and it had a look on its face kind of like I did. Like, oh, look. And it all happened so fast. It went from oh to rage to blown out, ticked off rage. And the sound like a dog would make, or a wolf you'd hear on TV or Discovery Channel, and if they're eating something and another one comes up there and tries to get it, and another one ties into him and snaps and growls and rips, the kind of attack sound they make. It sounded like that, but magnified. Like, I can't tell you how long. It was loud, it was big, and it was deep, and it ripped me. I could feel it just tore into me. It's kind of, I'm trying to make sure that I won't miss anything, and it's kind of hard to relive through this. as I turned, this thing did that, and I could see it lunged. It lunged, made a lunge motion towards me. And the look on its face was, I got you, ticked off. Nose was wrinkled up. Eyes was squinched down. He had his really long, pointed ears on top of his head. Really long. He was jet black. His eyes was like a mix of like a yellow, little tint of orange, like an amber color. And it wasn't like he was looking right at me. It was like he was looking through me. He had me. I was nothing. I was prey. And you get that sense of feeling what a deer would feel like if somebody was hunting it, or like being the prey, should I say? You know, like it's helpless. You got no, no control of the situation anymore. So, I had to collect myself here for a second.
Sure, take your time.
Okay. Anyway, now as I turn to run. I take off, and I slip on ice, and I slide. Well, as that happens, I feel pressure on my left arm. I feel like a frog almost, like a dead leg, like somebody punches you, a muscle, and it cramps it. I didn't think much of it. I just felt like, these things, my head's just racing at this point in time. Anyway, I slid. I hit the front of my truck. My head went down on the hood of my truck. And what went through my head was, it's over. It's done. I waited any second for, it's going to be over. It's done. It's over. You got me. I just waited for that feel of teeth sinking into my head, my neck, clawed hand grabbing into your back of your head, being jerked up, torn to pieces. Just kind of waited any second. I knew it. That's just over. My family went to my head of, oh God, what are they going to do now? How are they going to take this? Well, it's crazy to think. But anyway, I sat there for a second and realized nothing's happened. So I peeked back over my shoulder and looked, and he's not there. Well, I can see that where he was. I can see a big pile of blood on the road, and I see a big drag mark down the hill to the woods, and I seen him. He had this carcass of some kind on his arm, his left arm, and he's heading back to the woods. He's pushing it into the woods. He took his right hand up, and he pushed into the woods. His right hand, and it was huge. I mean, I just couldn't believe this was happening, and at the whole time I was thinking, holy crap, it's a werewolf. It's real. How is this happening? And I would say 7 foot plus height, 4 foot wide shoulders, smaller waist, jet black, coarse hair, not very long, but not real short. I can remember when he lunged at me, I can remember seeing his chest, a chest muscle, like pecs and shoulder muscles, and I seen the color of his skin, like a blue grayish leather look. He had hands. It looked like hands. It looked like it had like like a mitt, like a paw on his palm. You know, if that makes sense, like a dog paw on the palm of his hand, but fingers long, hard, fingers big, black, long claws, but like dog's toe pad on the bottom. But as he was walking away, I noticed his legs. He had massive thighs. Upper thighs was huge. When it got down to like where a knee would be, he kind of bowed right there, and it looked like he was standing on his toes, and his heels would be really, really high up on the back of his leg. Like kind of like you could say like a werewolf in a movie, kind of squatted down, halfway squat, walking on his toes, with really long feet, but his heels would be up on the back of his leg, kind of look. If that makes sense. So I'm explaining that right. Kind of like a dog's leg. Mixed a man's leg with a dog's leg. He had a thigh, but he had that lower backward bend in his legs, his toes. He pushed his way on himself onto the woods, carrying whatever he had with him. And that's when I come back to reality of what I need to do. I took off. I tried to get in my truck. I was sliding around all over the place. I jumped in my truck, tried taking off, and I was spinning, sliding all over the ice. And I was freaked out, thinking, holy crap, man, come on, we got to go. I'm scared, get the hell out of here. I need to go. And I couldn't. I remember it was irritating and scary at the same time that I couldn't get out of there fast enough because I was on this ice, sliding all over the place. Anyway, I get a little ways on the road, and the shock and the adrenaline is starting to wear off, and I feel this pulsating, a little bit of pain in my left arm, and I feel this tickle, like a tickle, something on my elbow, like a little weird tickle feeling on the tip of my elbow. And I got stopped. I guess I'm off the pass by now. I got off the mountain pass. I'm on a flat road, and the snow's wearing off. And I get myself stopped. I look at my arm. I turn my light on inside of my truck, and I realize that the arm of my sweater is shredded. I mean, it's ripped. It's ripped the heck back. Good. There's 4 good, distinct rips through the forearm of my sweater. And I can see blood through there, so I get my sweater pulled off there, and my arm is shredded in 4 spots. I got 4 shred marks on my arm. 2 big ones on the outsides, and then 2 shorter, smaller ones in the middle. And at the top of the middle claws, he took a chunk with him, like it was like a rip of a chunk of whatever piece of meat in my arm come with it, ripped it off, and then straight, sharp claw marks on the side. On the bottom side of my forearm was bruised pretty bad. It was like I couldn't tell if it was a squeeze or a thumb or if a bite. Bottom side of the jaw squeeze or what, but it was pretty wide. I know you were saying, you was talking tonight. It was probably too wide to be his mouth, I'm not sure to say how wide his mouth was. It was pretty wide, but not big, thick wide. He had a long muzzle, about 5.5 inches long. He had sharp fangs, a canine fangs that looked like they was not on the side. It was on the side, but not completely on the side. It was rolled up more like on a human version of their eye teeth. And he had bottom the same way. And his teeth in the front and the bottom was sharp, and they was on the sides back, like his molars were sharp on the outside edges, like they was folded and bent, like kind of angled inside towards his tongue, toward the center of his mouth. It's sharp on the outside and curved up on the inside. It's kind of hard to explain that, but I mean, it looked like the dude just walked straight out of a horror movie, comic book or something. You know, you can see on TV. I don't watch much movies at the time I was growing up and stuff. So, you know, I do know that I've seen some movies that this dude looked like it come out of. I mean, it was. Anyway, I'll get tied up in the whole mess of that thing. It just, you know, just freaked me out. Anyway, I took out my arm, and I'm bleeding pretty bad. I mean, he ripped it pretty good. So I took my shirt on off, and I wrapped my arm, and I get it wrapped up, and I actually wrapped a piece of shirt I had around my arm, and I had some duct tape. Like I always kept inside my seat. I always keep duct tape with me, and wrapped it up. And I had my suitcase with me. I grabbed another shirt, another sweater, put it on. I wasn't gonna tell my wife about it, because I'm bad about. I still think there's, you know, a lot of good people left out there, and I'll, you know, see somebody broke down or walking, I'll stop, check on them, help them out, give them a ride, whatever. And my wife always gets on to me about that. You know, she's like, you're going to do that one day, and somebody's, you know, going to get into something you ain't going to like, or it's going to be a bad situation, or bad guy, or whatnot. So I wasn't going to tell her I was going to hide it, you know, so I got that put on. Anyway, I can't remember the rest of the way home. It's a blur, to tell you the truth. It was, I think my mind was off somewhere else. I couldn't process this thing. Anyway, I got home. I hid it pretty good. I hid it for a while, about a week. Oh, I say about 5 days, 1 to 5 days. Nightmares get bad, sweat, and then my wife found my shirt. I didn't hit it too good. She found the sweater that was ripped, the rips in it shreds, and I had to tell her what happened. I told her what happened. She didn't doubt me at all. She said, I know there's something out there, I can't say what, but I was sure, there's, I don't doubt when people say they've seen something, and me being her husband, she didn't doubt me one bit. But she did tear into my butt for stopping, and told me that, I better not stop my butt again for nothing like that ever again. But anyway, the sweater I had on was like a thick wool. It was really thick, like they call it, I can't remember what they call it. I can't remember, but it's really thick, really, really hard, dense, packed sweater. And I was like, man, this thing had to have some razors to rip this, because it was shredded. Well, I'm not lying. I'm not exaggerating at all when I say we took that sweater and pulled it tight. I took a razor and swiped at it real hard, pushed it down, ripped it, cut into it, and it wouldn't cut through all the way. On that first swipe, it took a couple swipes. So whatever it used, whatever it hit me with, was razor sharp. It was sharp enough to cut through the sweater, no problem, all the way through, and down a long ways, and through me a good bit, and take a piece of meat with it. So, I'm pretty sure it was a hand, a claw that took a swipe at me, because, it was sharp, and you could actually see on, especially on the outside two swipes, the cuts, it looked like a triangle started, like an A, there's the point of them is just one little point, but as they come down, two lines kind of separate, like he was, like kind of an open dog's toenail on the bottom. You see what I'm saying? Like if you look at the bottom of a dog's toenail, how they got an opening in the toenail, a cup, you know what I mean? Like the point to the back is kind of an A-shaped triangle. It was kind of like that on the two outside ones, but they was close together, and it was real sharp, a real sharp cut.
Not only do I want to thank the eyewitnesses whose encounters you heard on tonight's show, I want to thank all the eyewitnesses who are nice enough to share the details of their encounters with all of us on the show. I really do appreciate it. I also really appreciate the listeners. If you take time out of your day to listen to the show, I want to thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in, and have a great night. If you've had a Dogman encounter and you'd like to speak with me about it, whether in private or on the show, you can reach me at contact@dogmanencounters.com. I'd love to hear from you.